Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. You're listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. My name is Daniel. Hope you're all here with Simon Mulaney, and this is the first of a two-parter we're going to be doing this week. And next week we're going to do the flip side to it. This is episode 79, Lead Generators Need to Become Brands. And no prizes for guessing what next week's podcast will be called. Simon, you say it all the time, but this week we're going to focus on it as a main subject for the podcast. The idea that lead generators need to become brands. To begin with, let me just ask you straight up, why?
There's two reasons. So one is regulations are impacting like the traditional activities of a lot of lead generators. We were just talking about an article that Alan Desimere shared on LinkedIn from the Advertising Standards Authority, and how that impacts lead buyers working with lead generators. And so if you're a lead buyer and you're putting your potential future and fines and whatever else in the hands of a lead generator, who you're going to work with? It's the companies that are most professional, the companies that you think are going to look after you effectively, the companies that look like brands, that look like they know what they're doing, aren't just, creating landing pages in 5 seconds or just working any vertical or anything. But there's another reason, and it's really far bigger than that, which is consumers are getting more savvy around like advertising. Costs are going up on every single advertising platform you can think of. Facebook's going up, Google's going up. And when you create like winky wanky brands that are just like everybody else's, all that's happening is you're competing against everybody else, and you're competing against all the clients that you're then trying to sell leads to. So the only way to move out of that is to effectively create a brand in a niche or a sub niche of the category that you're generating leads in. And you can't do this as like an overnight thing. It requires really deep thought, knowing the subjects inside and out, really understanding the consumers that are interested in those products. And this is really what we're talking about, is how you create a brand. It's really starting to like dig into the value that you can add and what people actually want.
So it's interesting because we'll dig into sort of more of why that's the case, and also importantly how you become a brand lead generator. But before we do, I think it's worth pointing out that even this podcast title and just generally, there's this habit we have of almost separating the two, buyers and sellers, and almost like pitching them against each other in a weird way. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like, not us specifically, just in general.
Like a fight, yeah.
It's a very kind of like binary thing, and you either, it's either or. You go to a website, it's like, are you this or that? But before we start digging it, is it almost worth saying, is that the best thing to be doing? Like, do we need to think of it more like a partnership in a sense?
Yeah, it is a partnership. I mean, we've covered this a lot of times on this podcast, which is effectively this is sales and marketing, right? When someone's doing lead generation for a company and they're an external lead generator, which is what we're talking about, they are your marketing department. That's all that's happening, is you're outsourcing your marketing. And so in their hands, you are putting your budget for the marketing, your ideas for the marketing. You can give them the guidelines that it's going to be operating in. But this is, essentially your shop window to the people that are going to be coming into you. Now, this comes back to, if you're a lead generation company, the main rule is like one to many. You don't just want one client. You may as well do it under the client's brand if you're generating leads for one client. And so the lead generator has multiple clients that they're effectively working with. And with all of them, they're an outsourced marketing department. What you're really paying for is media buyers. It's people that can just drive traffic to landing pages, and those landing pages go into the sales element. And so, when you think of marketing and sales in a company, do you think of one more important than the other? Like, what do you think? Do you think of one more important than the other?
Like marketing and sales. I mean, I'm sort of biased because I'm doing marketing, so yeah, I do. Absolutely, marketing is more important than I think
Let's get a sales guy on and see what they think. But
I think the importance is that it's not siloed. So
mm.
we talk. I guess it's similar. I know it's a bit different because they are external, but like in the same way internally, we wouldn't want to silo marketing sales, and it works better when we're working together. I would apply the same kind of idea.
It's a partnership. You're just striving for a single goal, which is giving this consumer the best experience.
Yeah.
And the product or solution they're looking for, and hopefully they'll become your customer because their experience and you're giving them what they want, and the marketing and the sales completely play into that both equally together. So 100% it should be seen as a partnership. And in the past, you're exactly right, it's been seen far more that the buyer of the leads like wields all the power. And to be honest with you, if you're just setting up brands really quickly, you aren't a brand as a lead generator. I think that's a really easy thing to do as well, because you sort of, you'll adjust to anything. You'll move in any scenario, that they have complete control over the relationship.
Okay, so like we said, we've covered that intro, but let's bring it back around to the podcast title: Lead generators need to become brands. You actually mentioned a word at the start of that, which reminded me of when we went to Legion World when was that? So the start of this year. A word that was used a lot was this idea of like professionalism, and the idea that lead generators maybe need to become a little bit more professional. It's kind of like an abstract term, really. What that means, like professional in some senses, like that's quite a big spectrum, but it was an idea that was repeated a lot. That maybe there is a degree of professionalism we need to kind of see amongst lead generators. But why do you think that's? I guess what does that look like to you? That professionalism, I guess, so much.
I'm being completely honest about this, right? It's really easy to become a lead generator. You can do it like anyone. There's no course, or there's no no certificate that you get or anything. You can go license unbounds or something. You could knock a landing page up in an hour. You can get clients pretty easily. You could run ads on Facebook to get clients. Like target certain companies, mainly the financial services industry, and you'll get a lot of clients quickly. You could target them. And then if you can drive traffic or people that generate leads, you can just contact them and buy the leads off them and sell them on. And so because of this, it's really, really easy to get into, but that doesn't make you a good lead generator. So it's easy to get into and hard to be professional, and hard to be good, and hard to be great at it. So the best lead generators that I see, and I'm sure this is the point of what the lead gen world thing you mentioned is, there needs to be this professionalism. When we know that it's the buyers that get the fines, it's the buyers that get into trouble, they need to be pushing the lead generators to be more professional. So signing off landing pages, doing due diligence, working with them to really understand how they're driving leads, measuring the ads that are driving sales. Are they compliant and everything else? And this professionalism, if you sort of start exploring it, it just leads one way, which is you start creating your own lead gen brands. I mean, you might have more than one brand, right? But typically you end up wrapping them all together if you have more than one. So I think that's really what it is about maintaining a sort of certain level of standard, so that you aren't just a fly-by-night operator that's either ripping consumers off, ripping people off, doing uncompliant things, and will just work with anyone that will buy your leads.
So with that in mind, as you say, they need to start taking professional, better brands. But in practical terms, for people listening, let's get into the meat of this podcast, the values to them. What do they need to do to become brands? What does that look like? What kind of brands? That's what we need to find out and discuss.
Yeah. So if we take like a really saturated market that a lot of people operate in, say like life insurance, or it could be like equity releases like it now. There's a bunch of verticals that there are a lot of people in, and they basically all do the same things. All the pages are the same. They'll all copy each other. It's all the same wording ripped off. A lot of them all have the same clients, and there's very little differentiation out there. It's like a sea of beige, which is similar to the pajamas of the people that they're targeting.
I see a stock imagery of couples on beaches.
Yeah, and just all that sort of stuff. So, we've covered this before, and a lot of people talk about stuff like Tom and Polly, that are well-known brands that were lead generation brands. I mean, there's a bunch of others. When I say there's a bunch of others, these sort of things are very few and far between. And this isn't necessarily because it can't be done. It's because everyone's on the hamster wheel of just generating revenue constantly. And they can't really get off the hamster wheel to be able to stop and really analyze, how can we be different? How can we create a sub niche within this vertical of our own? How can we create a brand that resonates more with people? How can we use the fact that we aren't the buyer of the leads to our favor? So, like that gives you an impartiality that is actually quite powerful. And I don't mean in terms of, we all know in like financial services, you can't be giving advice necessarily. But what you can give is like information about the buyers of the leads, the pros and the cons about them. If you're working with multiple people, you could ask them, you can look on their site, you can look through reviews, you could put all those on. This impartiality is actually a massive strength. You can give much more value being impartial than you potentially can when you actually, have something to lose if you are impartial. You find this in a lot of industries. So, doing that to your strengths is like massive, using that impartiality. I'm always surprised when I never see anyone do it. So I'd do this to really start nailing down a brand in a saturated market, because that's where it matters, right? If it's not saturated, you can become a big fish in a small pond anyway. But you need to create a niche that no one else is populating. And I've repeated this so many times, but you never see anyone doing it. You really need to understand the audience and why you're going to resonate with them. You need to understand the buyers and how you can work with them to sort of really drive home the message within your niche. I mean, forget all the design and imagery and wording and messaging and stuff, which is all incredibly important, but I assume you're going to be doing that anyway. So, like on a website, the messaging, your headline, everything needs to really convey all these benefits and the problems that you solve. And really, it's about giving people like value, becoming an expert in that sub niche that you're populating, finding out how you can add value, using your impartiality as a strength rather than a weakness. And looking to sort of, carry on the relationship after a lead has been delivered. I think the best thing to do is look at comparison sites here. It's slightly different because they're all working mainly on a CPA, but the model is very, very similar. You come onto their site and they're giving you a comparison. Now, unless you are doing a comparison, again, you're going to fall foul of the advertising standards authority doing this. But I think this is one of these things where like multi-sell comes into being thought about, because then you can actually potentially give the user a comparison. If you can't give them a comparison, just be honest about it's not a comparison. And the reason why you work with X companies and deliver the lead to one place rather than to many is because of why. We want to find you the best provider. So it's not something you have to think about. We work with these 3 respectable companies because we think they offer the best value, and we'll send you to the one that we think is most suitable. This sort of just requires a change in thought about how to help consumers rather than just like, constantly drive revenue from them.
I've just made a little note there for this subject, because I think that idea is probably worthy of a podcast and saying, right, so we'll revisit that. I think concept, I think, in the next couple of weeks, maybe. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, another thing you were saying actually made me think is maybe a note to end as we think about this. And obviously next week we're going to be looking at it from the perspective, we're going to be saying why brands need to become lead generators. And similarly, we're not going to be pitting them against each other. We're just going to be looking at their perspectives, equally subjectively. But it made me think as you were talking, when we spoke to Bruce Cook and from Lemon Tree, and he sort of said, I can't remember exactly the story, I'll have to go back and listen to it, but he was like, there was a point when they said, right, we've got a rival or something, and we've got an option. I think a rival company like invested in advertiser spend in leads in general. And he's like, we're going to invest in the brand. And he's like, I have no idea what they're doing now, but we've just like topped $1 billion or something in like whatever it is. And I remember like as he spoke about this, he was on the show also at that conference, there was this sort of like just hush around the rooms where there's lead generators were kind of like, it's $1 billion. It's sort of this sort of reverence. But yeah, I think that kind of illustrates the story nicely that for lead generators, investing in the brand is maybe the way that you are going to take it from where you are to the next level. Like it's a hamster wheel, so it's hard to sort of do that. But if you can do that, invest in a brand, that's how you get off the hamster wheel in the long run. You end up making a lot more money.
And I think one of the key things to think about with this, and this is just while you were talking, I was thinking about it, ultimately where I think the problem lies is, I think the way that you create a brand really as a lead generator is that it's the consumer that you're bothered about. Virtually all other lead generators that you speak to with winky wanky brands, what they're actually bothered about is their clients. It's that mindset shift, which is these are now our clients, which are the consumers, and this is the sales team that we send our clients to so they can get a great deal. The moment you switch your mindset to that, that's where you start creating a brand, because then it's about, well, how can we add value to these people? How can we create something that resonates with them? If they're our clients and they're the ones that matter, what are we doing to actually help them? Not how much money can I make by selling leads to this client, and the consumer is just like the thing that gets monetized. So if you'd have asked me again from the top and I'd just thought of that while you were speaking, that's just exactly what I would have said. But all the other things I mentioned, creating a niche and, the messaging and positioning and being different, and that's like how to do it. But the what you really need to do to kick that process off is it's consumer first. I think, I spoke to someone yesterday who he was asking me for advice on the landing page and saying, what would you change on this landing page? So I was just going through like a few things, and I said to him, similar to what I'm saying to you now, what I would do if I were you is do X, Y, and Z, and you're just the same as everyone else. And that's really the problem. I can make these little tweaks and tell you what you should change, but your real problem is that you're just in a sea of sameness of 100 other companies, and none of you are actually doing anything different. You're all competing against each other, and you're all competing against your clients, and that's the real problem. And he just said to me, yeah, but I have to spend more money doing that. So what he said, I was like, well, yeah, but it's, are you in it for the long term and the short term?
It's a mindset thing, isn't it? It comes back, and I understand that fear and that short-term risk, but if you look at the people who are like, if you want to bring it back to money, which I guess this guy eventually, that's bottom line, which is fine. If you look at people who are making serious money, they're the ones who are invested in this, so it's a bit of a catch-22 in that sense.
Well, yeah, no, all the companies I know that have done this, what we're talking about, which are few and far between, they're all the most successful companies, and they either get bought or they become, like stock listed. They become the biggest companies. It's just so it's funny because we can talk about it and make it sound easy, but it is this hamster wheel. Like, just people can't get off it. It's because of the real like short-term approach to lead generation. This is why, becoming a brand is something else. It's just like building any brand. It's not short term. You can't create a brand in the short term.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is quite interesting actually, because normally we sort of have a rough subject and we kind of just take whatever we want to, but it's been quite nice having this sort of roadmap of saying next week we're going to be doing the other side of this. So it sort of ranges in slightly. And the following week now, if we do this multi-sell thing, we look at the consumer first idea within that, we can set that out. So it's kind of like people listening have got a little bit of a bit of a journey about where we're going to go to.
I just did a LinkedIn post on multi-sell yesterday as well. So yeah, it could be quite a good thing to dig into.
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, if you are listening and you want the other side and you know what's coming up, then make sure you subscribe to the rest of it, and we can follow through with those next couple of weeks worth of plans, and we'll keep doing that. Cool. That was episode 79. Lead generators need to become brands. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.